The main event of this event. Boy, do I have a way with words. For the bad motherfucker belt.
BMF.
Nathan Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal. It's a 5-round fight. It's going to be a dog fight. Nate Diaz is actually the bigger fighter. That's always interesting to me. It's just like the Darren Till versus Gastelum fight is you have somebody that has spent most of their career at the lower weight class coming up and then being the bigger fighter versus their opponent who was also in the lower weight class at one point but has spent a longer duration at the now heavier weight class. And so this is taking place at welterweight. And you see Nate Diaz, he has what appears to be a bigger frame.
Yes.
He's taller, his head's bigger, his shoulders look broader.
They do.
And when you analyze the way that Nate Diaz fights, a lot of people think of him as like a jiu-jitsu boxer guy, a person that's going to throw punches and bunches and not give a fuck if you take him down because he's capable in that realm. But that hasn't necessarily been the story with Nate Diaz. As of late, he's utilized his boxing as a way to apply pressure, push his opponents against the cage, dirty box, land some knees, maybe working a takedown throughout that grinding process, and exercise his jiu-jitsu on the ground.
Well, one of the things that Nate is very good at when fighters are able to hang in there is to put pressure on them to the point where they aren't real. They're hanging in there, but more the sense of they're just trying to get him off of them, and it doesn't really translate to success. It more or less translates to Nate winning rounds and coming to a decision. One of the things that I think actually, you know what? I would say that this is going to be a major deciding factor for this is really going to be how Jorge responds to the pressure of Nate if he's able to start getting the better of the stand-up and Nate starts to try and force the fight to the ground. Masvidal, while he probably hasn't recently, was working with Colby Covington and has definitely paid dividends for his ground game. But
And Yoel Romero.
But the thing that neither of them do is they are not BJJ specialists. And while you may... And takedowns and all that are very well good to learn how to defend against, but it is always a different animal when the volume comes and you are expecting the fight to be in one place and then you get dragged to another. One of the things that Colby did do was apply pressure and chain wrestle very well. Yoel does not. Yoel is not a pressure fighter. Yoel is explosive and he can just pull you down. But Nate beats you down over a period of time. And the fact that this fight is 5 rounds, especially once you get into the 4th and 5th, this really starts to fall into Nate Diaz's wheelhouse.
I see this fight going to a decision. I don't think either man's going to get finished by the other. I can definitely see Nate Diaz wearing on Masvidal later in the fight, maybe even getting the fight to the ground. But in a weird counterintuitive way, I see the Ben Askren fight actually being good preparation for this. Somebody that's going to constantly be moving forward and trying to tie you up, instigate the clinch, get you perhaps against the cage, drag you to the ground. Now, and I mean, volume punching and all that, they're not one for one the same, Nate Diaz and Ben Askren, but I think the kind of pressure that they apply and the way they try to break their opponents isn't so different. And therefore, Jorge Masvidal has definitely recently trained a lot of escapes from against the cage or exiting clinch situations. And at the end of the day, these are two guys that are really comfortable with their hands. But Nate Diaz is he's kind of somebody that gets into the rhythm of the fight as it goes on. And I feel like that's against somebody that's as technical and precise as Jorge Masvidal, and also somebody that's as composed as Jorge Masvidal. That's a hard thing to rely on. And that's a way to lose rounds. And if he goes down 2 rounds, well, he might win 2 of the next 3, but that doesn't matter because you lose the fight then.
I think a big thing about beating Nate Diaz is you have to be able to determine where your fight is going to be and be able to take advantage of Nate's deficits, whereas he's not the strongest fighter, and the fact that he can start slow. Most of Nate's losses, I mean, you have your Conor McGregor 2, which take it or leave it, but the Rafael dos Anjos fight, the Benson Henderson fight, these are guys that are able to take advantage of the fact that they can hang with Nate on the feet, and when the fight goes to the ground, they aren't a fish out of water. an important piece to beating Nate Diaz is to not let him get in his groove. And that is a very difficult thing to do, especially as you wear on into these fights. Cardio is of the utmost importance for Jorge Masvidal, as is being as precise as possible. This is definitely a fight where it's going to be difficult to call the winner, but if I had to say one, I think that Nate Diaz is probably going to come out on top.
This is going to be a much more tactical and cognitive, a cerebral fight that people are giving it credit for. These are two really experienced fighters in Jorge Masvidal and Nate Diaz. They're some of the most experienced fighters, the most tenured fighters in the UFC. These are guys that can make adjustments and that have seen so many different styles and trained for so many different kinds of fighters. Neither is going to show something that the other hasn't seen before. And I like Jorge Masvidal just because I think he is the crisper, cleaner striker with more power. And I don't believe either guy is going to fold from, like physical factors like cardio or something like that, like how Nate Diaz has been able to break opponents in fights past.